So our journey today is going to be talking more about why risk matters in the field of project management, program management, enterprise agility, and stuff like that. And what is risk management when we talk about this? And finally, how to align with these principles of risk management in your daily work. So that's exactly what my focus is going to be here today. That being said, a little bit of a disclaimer here. This is not a comprehensive risk management or enterprise agile course or webinar where you walk away with pretty much every answer to every question. This is only a bird's eye view. So while I'm bringing some information from different standards, different organizations, I may be leaving out some, this is by choice, just to make sure that I'm able to cover pertinent information within a short amount of time frame. Okay. All right. What does Agile deliver? When I ask this question to many of them, immediately they start telling like, oh, Agile delivers value, which is very true. But what is value made up of? How do you think Agile is delivering this value? The next one is people beginning to think like, oh, increment. We are giving one or more increments that combine together, provide some kind of a value to the customer. Okay, wonderful. Then what are these increments supposed to be? They are product, service, or result. It could be a product increment. It could be some kind of a service that is being consumed by your work, or it could be a documentation or any other kind of a result as well. So it could take a combination of any one of these features. Now, many times people come and say, oh, project management no longer plays a role in Agile. We don't want project managers and stuff like that. There is a big, group of thought process regarding why we don't need project management and stuff like that. But when you look at the whole concept behind definition of a project itself, according to the Project Management Institute, this is coming directly from the project being a temporary endeavor to deliver unique product, service, or result. So even though when some of the frameworks like Scaled Agile come and say, oh, we are having an Agile release train in one particular product to release a product increment or value, and then increment this multiple times, the definition of a project is nothing more than a temporary, which means definition fits it to the 2-week, 1-month sprint definition as well, or iteration to deliver whatever we have agreed upon, right? So the idea of a project is more like a phoenix bird that comes up, delivers the product, and goes back. But product is long-term, project is short-term. Something to keep in mind. Now, how does this matter in terms of larger projects and stuff like that? But even before you go to that particular extent, this is not like a simple straight line where we are able to do everything that we promised and stuff like that, because as Rick was mentioning at the beginning, uncertainties come up, right? And so we are able to see lots of different uncertainties in the form of business challenges, technological know-hows, many regulations, and the compliance to those regulations. Some are internal, some are external, and these things come up and challenge us in our ability to deliver the value that we think we want to deliver in whatever time frame we have agreed upon. Now, when you take this to one more level, where you are trying to say programs or portfolios, or other frameworks talk about the Scaled Agile, where we talk about solution train and multiple arts and stuff like that. When you start looking at all these additional definition, quality flows through the combined outputs coming from multiple individual chains or trains or streams, however you want to call it. And then when they all are combined, they become capabilities that somebody is able to benefit from. And if that benefit becomes valuable for the client or the customer, the degree of such benefit becomes the value. So value itself takes on an interesting nuance through the definition of quality here as a result of how you deliver structured projects, right? So in my humble opinion, value, therefore, is a function of quality. And quality itself is a function of risk because many things that you do not predict can come and impact you, right? And value, therefore, is directly proportional to risk. So if you say you want to deliver value and you don't know about risks that will impede in your delivery of value, then you're going to be, not necessarily in a good place, right? So the story that I am trying to tell is pretty much predominant in multiple, years, and this has been present for a long period of time. But people have limited attention span, and so they don't necessarily pick it up. So when you look at 2018, Scrum Alliance did a survey, and they came back and said risk management as one of the top management technique used by Scrum team. Now, in 2019, Agile Alliance did a study, and they came back and said Agile teams using risk management are more likely to deliver value by the definition that I just articulated before. In 2020, PMI did a study, and they emphasized 88% of successful Agile projects use some form of risk management thought processes. And in 2021, the State of Risk Management survey, they emphasized that 39% of all the global banking, financial, and telecom industries adopted some form of integrated risk management thought processes in their Agile teams to address the growing cybersecurity threats that the Agile teams were not necessarily always accounting for. And in 2022, the State of Agile survey, they reasoned that in order for people to scale Agile, one of the important criteria is not necessarily to accelerate time to market and improve delivery predictably, but also lower the risk. So in 2023, the State of DevOps 2023 survey basically indicated that 40% higher organizational performance comes when people embrace risks as part of their automation, site reliability engineering, which is SRE, and those kinds of thought processes. So the thought process of incorporating risk is constantly being present. Now we are trying to re-emphasize that in multiple studies, in multiple organizations, repeatedly emphasizing that, make sure you bring risk management thought processes here. Let's take a look at the 17th State of Agile 2023 report. Now, if you look at this particular number, they are expressed in percentage, and I'm going to ignore the percentage that is focusing on very well and somewhat well, where Agile adoption is working very well or somewhat well. But if you focus on the other element, which is going to be pretty much less than 50, more than 54% over here, because 44 is over there. So, about 56% is on the other side. And so when you look at that particular thing, why is that the case? Why is a majority of the people coming and saying Agile adoption is not working effectively or as effectively as it should, right? When you dig a little bit more deeper into this, let's take a look at who is actually leading the Agile adoption within your organization, within your business unit. So there could be an IT department, there could be a HR department, there could be a PMO department, there could be multiple different units that are actually leading it. But when you look at this, the business led is only about 31-32%, where there is a top support and the business people are coming together and saying, let's adopt this the right way and stuff like that. But when you look at the other extreme, the some and not sure at all, let's drop that. And if you focus in the majority area where we are focusing on, it's primarily technology led. And one of the biggest pet points, pet peeves that I have with people that use Agile is they go back to the Agile manifesto and they take this working software over comprehensive documentation as the gospel. And everything is supposed to be working software. And we don't need to worry about too much comprehensive documentation. As long as it's working, it's great. So the focus is more about how to deliver technical projects more rather than thinking about one of the Agile principles, which is also listed in the Agile 12 principles, that business people and technical people should work together on a daily basis. Now, when that doesn't exist, the focus becomes more and more on let's focus on continuous integration. Let's focus on continuous delivery. Let's focus on technical debt management. And the QA members start, wondering about code coverage in the form of statement coverage, conditions coverage, path coverage, like happy path scenarios and stuff like that, boundary conditions, and exploratory coverage and stuff like that. And that's the focus. And so technical focus becomes the main reason why the non-technical focus considerations are left out. Now, when you think about business agility and enterprise agility, it is not just technical team agility alone, right? So my thoughts here for agility is a lot bigger than just technical value alone. Now, when you take it to the next level of business agility, and I have delivered lots of webinars on the business agility, so I'm trying to condense this information here, is a lot more bigger than technical operation and process considerations, right? And when you take the enterprise agility, it is a lot bigger than the business agility, which includes the technical operations and process. But in addition, we'll start looking into the employee well-being, capacity planning, societal contribution, where we are talking about the ESG and CSR initiatives and stuff like that, right? So there is a lot more to enterprise agility. So it is a big holistic picture. It's not like a siloed thought process here. So when you are looking at enterprise agility here, let's focus on all these elements, okay? Now, some anecdotal experience based upon just my own, experience over here. Now, I was responsible for investment portfolio, development of product within the investment portfolio, and it is in the obviously finance industry. And one of the reasons that we consolidated as a result of some of the findings was the failure was primarily connected to one of these three elements, or more than one of these three elements, which is, did I consider the data security considerations while I'm developing a project? So you may actually start writing a user story that says, I would like to, as a user, I would like to make sure that this login screen works. But if your IT security policy that is governing your own company or your own enterprise is requiring some two-factor authentication, that needs to be factored in. No, you cannot release the functionality out to a potential customer as a product increment, because now that's opening up to multiple DSS data security standard problems, or the disclosure controls and internal controls that comes with Sarbanes-Oxley or GDPR constraints, right? And so some of the thought process began thinking from the end in mind is really important. And immediately people start thinking like this is one of the reasons why we are moving from moving into DevOps, the shift left, shift right, and stuff like that. And I always come back and say, between shift left and shift right, you also have to think about shift up and shift down, where the value flows up, vertically and down as well, up and down as well. So this was not done. As a result, there was a lot of brand reputation problems, financial penalties that could come into play, and continued benefit realization. If you recall some of the previous thought process that I mentioned, I talked about benefits coming from the multiple capabilities being integrated. Right now, another anecdotal experience from a medical device industry is not necessarily considering elements of patient safety. Now, when we talk about patient safety, this is not just what privacy by design principles promote as PII. PHI is a lot more bigger than PII. And failure to consider some of this HIPAA considerations and these elements into our user story definition itself was complicating some of the work that we will be able to do. So the CFR Part 11 electronic signature considerations, device considerations, and all these things were not necessarily properly factored in. As a result, the impact was potential, this didn't happen, potential patient life problems. Because one of the software that we were writing, we created what is called a BMI, body mass index calculator. And as soon as our software was able to create a BMI calculations, it no longer became a software, it became a medical device, because people could use it or abuse it and make some decisions that will impact their life. and financial penalty, and customer trust and brand reputation, all these elements come into play. So what are some of the basic foundations that I'm trying to think over here in terms? It's a lot bigger than technical elements alone. So you need to think business level risks and technical level risks alone are insufficient in designing your projects. Now, why are business risks really that important? When you take a look at this, I want to bring the quality domain over here. And, I'm sure every one of you have been exposed to the quality at this point, but from a project management, total quality management domain, there is a principle called cost of quality, which goes into the cost of conformance or cost of non-conformance or cost of good quality and cost of bad quality, as some people call it. And it has four legs. And on the leftmost extreme, on the prevention cost, is where the actual quality assurance come into play. And the quality control is more on the assessing the quality, where you are rating test cases and inspecting them, the Jumbo walks, as people call them, all those things come into play. And then as it moves into the bad quality or cost of non-conformance, we are moving into things that actually are not necessarily working. So rework and scrap work and stuff like that. And if they have been released, unfortunately, to the client, then it becomes escaped defect, creating all kinds of other things that I mentioned, like liabilities, lost business, warranty issues, and stuff like that. Now, when you take a look at this, on both sides, I have listed a lot of risks, as well as on the foundation, a lot of risks. And I'm not going to go into each and every one of those risks, but only one of them is about technical risks. Quality assurance is more about preemptive, proactive thought processes that are process-oriented. Quality control is more about the reactive thought processes that are product-oriented. So when you think about all these things, what are the types of business risks? What are the things that could impact the schedule and scope? And what are some of the market risks that are coming into the play? Resource risks, communication, budget risks, and on the other end, all the other elements of reputation, customer risk, and stuff like that. So there's so many other elements come into play. But will a technical person who is actually writing the code or who is actually just doing the testing alone will be able to think all these elements? The answer is no. But everybody should be able to see through this. So everybody should be the eyes and ears of what we are trying to accomplish over here. So this is one of the reasons why I come back and say business risks are more important, and one person is not supposed to be responsible for identifying all of these elements. So what is going on here, right? Risk is frequently associated with a bad connotation. As soon as you say it's risky, you are not necessarily communicating the right message. And so many times people withhold. But emerging from what I call as the 5P standards, which includes the project, the program, the portfolio, the product, and the process management principles, I focus on all these elements because one without the other doesn't work. Risk is associated with both opportunities and threat. This is the reason why we do what is called a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. How our strengths and weaknesses are playing toward opportunities and threat. We are always talking about this, but we miss these things out, and we basically say anytime it is risk, it means it's not giving the right message here. But I have news for you: risk is not always bad. Risk is not a bad word at all in the first place to begin with. And now the more we understand risk, the more we will understand how we will be able to successfully position our product for the value delivery that we keep talking about in a qualitative fashion, right? So I repeatedly emphasize this. If you don't manage risk, risk will manage you. Now, the latter won't be a good solution at all. So proactively get on top of managing risks. Okay. Now, how to incorporate risk in an agile, enterprise or agile ways of thinking here. Now, cultivate the habit of raising risks everywhere in value delivery. We need to start doing this. Oh, it's very easier said than done, Sriram. How do we do about this? How do we go about this? Now, I do want to give another little personal story here. Oh, about 5-6 years back, I had to go to India. My mom was admitted in for a cardiac arrest, and I literally flew to India at a very short notice, and everything went well. But during the whole process, I was observing the hospital where there's a constant ECG monitoring and the doctors coming and talking about where the blockage was and stuff like that. Now, I want to talk about this ECG. Now, when I took a look at this ECG, something else got my attention. Normally speaking, for those that are in the medical industry, P means atrial contraction, where the heart is contracting to actually pump the blood, and then the QRS indicates where the ventricles are contracting to actually, release the blood, and then everything relaxes before the whole cycle repeats. Now, I saw this, and it connected at a different wavelength for me. Right? Immediately, I started thinking about the project management domains. P means procurement for me. Anytime you have procurement in your project, a vendor, a contractor, a consultant, or a partner, that means high risk, because the ability of them to do the work impacts you. Their non-delivery and their non-conformance is going to impact you. Now, Q is the quality foundations for me. So lack of technical excellence compromises the design. So we talk about privacy by design, security by design, non-functional requirements, the exities, and all those things we talk about. But we need to actually bring those things into the quality domain here. Now, R means resources, and I don't mean resources in the form of human resources alone. Yes, human resources are included, but it also includes the facilities, the equipments, the materials, the infrastructure, and supplies. The more we are able to self-organize as people, the more we are able to pay attention to these non-human resources to make sure that they are getting utilized properly as well. And in the world of cloud computing, many times people come back and say, "Oh, it's okay, let's go to the cloud." Yes, going to the cloud also is easy, but at the same time, going to the cloud is not always cheap, because if you have an EC2 machine that is constantly doing nothing, but it's there, you are going to be built for that. So things like that have to be kept in mind as well. So both people and non-people resources have to be kept in mind. The scope of work that we commit. What are we doing? How are we analyzing this? How the team is actually buying into this? And what is the prioritization we do in terms of the Moscow principles and stuff like that? So how that is coming into play. And finally, the team, the schedule, the T, which is going to be how people are able to work together, how people are having the time to support each other. Is everybody is having so much work that they cannot support each other, then where is team? There's only me, myself, and everybody else. There's no team here. So what are the time that we are actually making available for the team to do some experimental work or be able to support somebody else and stuff like that? So all these things are important. And the instant you start thinking in terms of each and every one of those things, you are thinking about risks constantly. So this is one way I started connecting with how you can think of risks, right? So when you are ready, you see. This is a very powerful statement that I have written here. You don't see when you are ready, but when you are ready, you see. The same book gives me different meaning when I am reading it for the 100th time. But until you read 99 times, it probably may not give you the same information, right? So you may want to actually experiment, and that's when you are going to know the information, right? So when we talk about the world of risks, there are too many terms that people use that look more or less synonymous or similar, but they're not the same. So there's a lot of differences in the world of risks, and I have picked the most important critical terms with respect to risks over here. So let's take a look at these things. Risk and issue. When you look at them together, risk has not happened. That's why we say it has a probability of happening, but it has not happened. Issue, on the other hand, has happened, which means the probability is 100%. Right? Here you are seeing an example where somebody could potentially fall, but nobody has fallen yet. On the other hand, when somebody is stuck in an elevator and the doors cannot open, well, that's an issue. Somebody needs to get some work done at this particular point. The same category is going to be the known versus unknown risks. Now, in the case of a plane flying, I'm sure those people that are that are used to flying a plane and stuff like that will know this much better. But there is going to be 4 important forces that are acting up: the thrust, the drag, the gravity or the weight, and then the lift. These are the things that needs to be constantly in balance, right? Those are known forces. So we can actually accordingly manage the way the plane is going to be flying. but there are going to be some unknown risks, sudden patterns, weather patterns that come up that you did not think about or that just happened. And as a result of those things, you may want to make some changes here. Example is this a weather pattern called microburst, where there is going to be a big column of strong pull, gravitational downward pull that could actually be very detrimental to a flying plane. So things that are unknown forces that could impact your project as well, if flying is your project here. Now, primary and secondary risk. Now, primary is the main source of risk that you think is going to happen. So a simple example is, you are going to start a fire to cook something. That's great. But if you don't control the fire correctly and let it go to an extent where you are not controlling it, then secondary risk comes into play, where as a result of risk response that you are instituting, something else happens. Right, so that's going to be your secondary risk over here. And then the next category is the pure versus the residual risk. Now, pure risk has a catastrophic impact, like at a tsunami that is coming up. No matter how well prepared you are, there is no way you are going to be completely prepared, right? And that's a pure risk. And nobody is going to document in our risk register or in our risk management plan what is the impact of tsunami coming and hitting us. So we should all be in different places. Well, from a business continuity and disaster recovery, that's a different story. You can think about that, but that's the pure risk. Whereas the residual risk is the risk that has left an impact on us because risk materialized, became an issue, or had a secondary response, and we met with this, and as a result of the contingency plan and stuff like that, we somehow solved it, but it still has the scar on us, right? That's resulting from a surgery, for instance. The problem is resolved, but still the surgical scar is left on our hand, right? Those are the other elements. The next one is going to be variability versus the ambiguity risk. Now, variability is more about operational considerations. Like, many times in the quality domain, we use this control chart to see how well things are following and the rule of 7 thought processes to see, how it's working and stuff like that. But variability is more about the operational elements, you monitoring something to see, am I reaching a threshold and stuff like that. The ambiguity is more about strategic risk. Should I include AI-driven projects right now? Am I going to be left behind if I do something in AI? And if I continue to do with the AI and do it right, what is going to be the challenges? So these are some strategic decisions that people have to think about. And so ambiguity risks come into the strategic domain as well, right? The emergent and compliance is another one. The regulations that we are constantly talking about are EEF, which stands for Enterprise Environmental Factors. You have to study them, you have to know what the impact is, and you have to implement them. But compliance is more about the organizational processes, which is OPA. Did you do what you said you will do? Show me the evidence that you have done it. This is where the traceability, auditability, transparency, all those elements come into play. So these are different categories of terms that people use that, many times people do not necessarily pay attention to, and it introduces a risk by itself. Okay, so something I want to talk about. So let's talk about the stages of risk management real quick here, okay? Now, these are the typical stages. I put them in a linear fashion for people to think through, but it's not necessarily always linear. So you want to start with the planned risk management. You want to identify all the risks as much as possible, and you want to do some kind of an analysis, which could be a qualitative or a quantitative analysis. Followed by that, you will do the risk response treatment, and monitor them on a constant basis using appropriate risk responses, which is what I mentioned as contingency plan and stuff like that, and continuously monitor. So as part of a continuous monitoring, you could go back to any one of the previous stages here as well. That's one of the reasons why I said it's not linear, but I put them in a linear fashion for people to mostly capture here. Now, these are all the different artifacts or outputs that we create. A risk management plan, what is considered, certain category of risk, and what are the types of risk that we will gather, we will look into and stuff like that. As a result, you create a risk register, which is going to be a log of all the risks that you have identified and your next plan of action. And then from here, you create what are the most important things that I want to focus on. Not all risks are equal. So what are the risks that I should really work on, and what are the risks that I'm not going to work on? Again, as I mentioned, I'm not going to go into all the details behind how you compute the contingency reserve and stuff like that. But those are for for specific audiences that may want to know more about this. And as a result of this, you are updating the risk register, and you are identifying what are my risk response strategies. And if these risk responses are materializing and you need to go to a change request, and you follow the whole process and stuff like that. This is the reason why risk is associated with change management. You don't have proper risk management, you do not have proper change management. You do not have proper risk management and change management, there is no good governance. So they are all very nicely connected together. Now, how does this bring together in an agile approach? So risk-adjusted product backlog. When you have a user story identified, what is the risks associated with the user story? When you have a big epic, what is the risk associated with the epic if you have not broken down into user stories? So those are thought processes. Now, as part of the sprint planning or iteration planning, when the team is coming together and say, these are the things that we can pick up from the list of the most valuable product increment that a product owner has articulated, risk accommodation in your iteration backlog. I don't want to take too many items that are very risky, which means, potentially if all of those risks materializes, then I will not be able to deliver anything. And again, this is the reason why we bring up the Moscow principles, like, the 70% you should do must, and the 15% you should do should, and the remaining, out of the remaining 15, you do 10 and 5 for should and won't. So you figure it out. So the next one is going to be the risk review in the iteration planning. In every iteration planning, in the daily stand-up, subsequently in the actual reviews of themselves, how did we fare well in the risks? How well did we monitor the risks? How well did we identify the risks? What are the risks that we did not identify, which actually became evident later? So these are things that we need to start thinking through, which means we are actually feeding that back into our backlog grooming and refinement and iteration planning, release planning, and all those activities. So this whole process is driven by risk. Okay. Now I'm going to go into the stages within each and every one of them and start giving you some techniques over here. None of this technique is like, immediately going to be, new for you. These are all things that we have all used to, but I'm just bringing them back into the game here so that you understand them and you can take this right away back and start working on them. Documentation review. When you have, whether it is collected as a list of user stories, or you have collected them as a functional dependency stories that are supporting the implementation consideration and stuff like that, what are the documentation reviews that you have? In fact, I even do forward scanning and backward scanning on the documentation to make sure that they are all looking good. And for some reason, if you are in a regulatory context and you have to create a BRD or a functional specification document, high-level design document, detailed level design document, and stuff like that, that you have to create as part of the work product that you are creating for auditable reasons, then these are areas that you can start working on. And what were the checklists that you had previously created, how good those checklists were? Again, I was giving you different examples, right? One of the important checklists that we do in a commercial plane is, or even for that matter, any flying arrangements, is a departure checklist and an arrival checklist, right? What are the checklists? How good are those checklists? Is it based upon a specific region, specific type of plane, and stuff like that also comes into play. Assumptions analysis. How well we are turning our assumptions into risks. If we have an assumption and that assumption proves to be wrong, you have a risk. And there's no point in telling like I have 3 assumptions, but I have no risks. Every assumption is loaded with risk. The next one is the diagramming technique. And we have in quality domain, we come up with 7 different diagramming techniques, and I'm only picking up one important diagramming technique, which is a flow chart. Think about the flow chart as a simple example as to how you are able to structure your thought process, because it gives you those boundary conditions, those happy path and the non-happy path, and all those elements you are able to think through. The next one is information gathering. How different types of people are providing input. In a good backlog refinement, the customers are facing people like account manager, relationship manager, project managers, program managers, business analysts. They come and review and provide input from a customer standpoint before the user stories are even factored into subsequent release planning or iteration planning. So things of that nature, how different people are providing input into this particular thing rather than a siloed technical only thought process over here, right? So risk analysis, when we take into the next stage after the identification, you are moving into the risk analysis. And here, like I mentioned, you want to come up with some kind of what is the most important thing that I should work on, right? So when you are doing this, you want to start categorizing the risks, because it makes sense for you to analyze all of the related things together, so that you're not missing out the importance of something else impacting as well. So you want to take a look at what is individually impacting as well as impacting overall. Now, we all live in a VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous world, right? There are different techniques or different frameworks that help you in how you should categorize them. One is a PESTLE framework. It's actually called PESTLE, PESTLE, but I added additional E and D, ethical and demographic dimension to it because people missed that out. The PESTLE stands for political, environmental, societal, technical, legal, and economical. And the other E and D stands for ethical and demographic. That's just one category of looking at large scale projects, portfolios, and programs and stuff like that. The next one is maybe mid scale initiatives. So you can start looking at TCOP, which is another framework which is standing for technical, environmental, commercial, operational, and political. And the next one is the VRIO, most internal projects, internal initiatives. We look at are we adding value? Is that a rare product that we are actually, or rare functionality that we are introducing at this particular point? Is that function something that can be imitated by another competitor, and how are we organized to deliver this thing? So these are different frameworks. I'm not saying one framework is better than the other. Each one has its own place in the risk management domain, but think about which one applies to your specific scenario. Now, I always come back with something very simple because all these things are very, very loaded. Even for somebody at an individual project level, as a business analyst, system analyst, architect, or QA function person, automation engineer, whoever it is, I always start thinking in terms of the simplicity. That I call it a TOE principle here, which is technical feasibility. Can we technically do this? Right? The next one is operational feasibility. After we have released this functionality, can we sustain this? And can we sustain this within an environmental consideration for one client, multiple clients, multiple functionalities and stuff like that? So it's a lot more thinking process over here. This itself will break yourself into the PESLE or TCOP and stuff like that, but it is actually a simple framework for you to start thinking. Right? I coined this TOE principle myself to help in the thought process. The next one is the qualitative analysis, right? In the qualitative analysis, you want to create from based upon these categories and stuff like that, you want to create a lookup table of some sort where you are able to say, this is what is my risk management principles here. Accordingly, you are able to come back and say, these are the things that I will watch, not important. I call them don't major in the minor. And the other one is pure list. Yes, it may be a catastrophic impact, but the probability is so low that you don't want to spend the time. But in between is where you really want to focus your attention on. And this is where I come back and say, think of a risk breakdown structure. And these are not terminologies that I'm introducing. This is like, what are the different category of risks that you have? And for that particular category of risk, what does low mean? What does medium mean? And what does high mean? And I'm using only the simple low, high, medium indicator. Depending upon your industry, you may want to have, 10 scales of level 1 to level 10, or 5 scale, 1 to 5. So you may have different qualitative labels associated with that, but that's fine. But you are giving some examples here in terms of what does this mean, so that a new person who is looking at this does not necessarily pick the wrong category. Now, this is very important for you to help the other team members come up with decision making. The whole idea behind this is risk-driven planning, right? Now, the next is going to be the quantitative analysis. Now, we do have some elements that we have already supported in the risk breakdown structure, but we are now moving into the accuracy of decision making. There is a difference between, if there are two risks and both are, high, which one is more important than the other? Now I want to have a lot more additional information, that there's a difference between 99.1 and 99.2. And the difference is going to be a life or death situation. In that particular case, 99.2 becomes more important. So accuracy of decision making is extremely important over here. In the impact on the product is going to be too high. Because remember, I said technical, operational, economic, environmental feasibilities. Technically, it may be something very easy to do, but operationally, it may be something very difficult to sustain. So you may want to start thinking in terms of multiple documentation, multiple training materials, multiple other things before you actually release that functionality to the users. Then more higher contingency reserves. Contingency reserve is a term that we use in the risk management domain, or as well as in the project management domain, to see how much buffer in terms of both time and money you are keeping for yourself to accommodate for these risks, right? Now, different techniques exist. I'm not going to go into all these techniques. One is called the failure mode effect analysis, which is FMEA. Other one is the expected monetary value, which is EMV, and decision tree, Monte Carlo simulation, sensitivity analysis, many things that are available over here. Okay, so I'm just giving you examples of what are some of those things to keep in mind. Now, once you have done all these analysis, how do you move forward? This is when the decision making comes into play, right? In order for you to factor the decision making in the normal conditions, what we have is the probability and impact gives you what is called an exposure. What is my risk exposure, risk score, in other words? So based upon that, I can come back and say the highest risk score is what is going to be worked on, which is good. But while you are figuring this out, effective risk management also factors in, a few additional details. Those are, what is the appetite of the organization to accommodate this? The organization may have a lot more, a bigger wallet, and they may be able to support many things that, an individual project or program may not necessarily be able to support. So what is the organization's appetite in handling these kinds of risks? If there is going to be a liability issue, the organization's appetite will be very low. Whereas if it's going to be a couple of spelling mistakes here and there, and that can be addressed later, or if there is a functionality that can be solved with a patch or an intermediate release and stuff like that, they may have no problem with that. So that's something that you want to keep in mind. The next one is project threshold. What is the project threshold? So projects exist within the organization. So the degree of variation that the project manager, program manager, product owner is willing to accommodate within that particular threshold. If it's going to take 2-3 hours for somebody to solve a question, that people may come back and say, it's okay, we will address this at a later point, but it takes occasionally once or twice this kind of things happens, and no problem with that. But if the same issue is going to be pronounced with 50 different customers and everyone is facing this, and that's going to be a problem, public relations problem. So the threshold may be, very little for that particular person. The next one is going to be the tolerance. The tolerance is going to be at the individual stakeholder levels. So a QA manager may come and say, no, a website should have everything perfect, and I will not allow the spelling errors to accept, to work, or grammatical errors, or formatting problems to exist. On the other hand, a project sponsor may come back and say, if you're able to deliver on time, these two things are no showstoppers for me. So different people have different tolerances, but all these tolerances, all these stakeholder tolerances should be consolidated into the threshold, and multiple project thresholds are all factoring into the appetite. You see how projects roll into programs and programs roll into the portfolios and stuff like that at this point, and how governance plays an important role. Now, this is where you are looking at the triggers. Identifying these things are okay, but what is the trigger that something is going to happen? In the case of a pure risk that we were talking about, what is the risk that a tsunami is going to come? So tsunami warnings that needs to be present. So for every one of those things, we can start going through the risk triggers. What is going to trigger this? So that the probability is going to go high, or the impact is going to be going high. Because if any one of those things is going to go high, the exposure increases. So this is where you're looking at what is the warning or the symptoms that is going to say a risk is about to occur before it occurs. And if we haven't done this enough analysis properly, we would never be able to do this. And in that case, we become reactive. Right. So what are some of the risk frameworks that exist? Again, I want to call that out that, I'm not calling out all the different potential risk standards here. So there is a failure mode effect analysis, which I talked about. Most often, this is in the supply chain, manufacturing industry. It can also apply in a healthcare domain. The fault tree analysis is another one that applies in aerospace, chemical, nuclear, automobile, in those kinds of areas. The General Automation Manufacturing Protocol, GAMP, which is extremely applicable in the medical devices, pharmaceutical space, and stuff like that. The HAZOP analysis applies in the food industry. The Basel and solvency, in the case of financial industry, the Basel applies for banking, solvency applies for insurance industry, and the COBIT applies for all IT related services that in fact supports pretty much all the above things that I talked about. Now, within these things, there are going to be some guidelines, some recommended things, and there are some required things based upon your project, your industry, and stuff like that. So there are some guidelines. The GXP protocols, the Six Sigma, computer system validation, computer system assurance, all these things come into play over here. And the next one is going to be regulations. We talked about SOX, GDPR, HIPAA, and the DO standards for aerospace and stuff like that come into play here. And you also have some of those vendor neutral ISO standards, International Standard Organization, that comes up and provides certain things. Certain things are generic, like the 31,000 for risk management framework, and certain things are very specific for some specific industry. 14971 is for medical devices industry, and 26262 is for automation space. Similarly, there are advisory boards. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, the ISACA, the FAIR, and many other models exist that come and say these are all the different standards that we have to keep in mind. So when you look at these things, you take a look at the negative risks, and most often that is how we conceive it, and the negative risks. And so you try to avoid it, and if you can not avoid it, you try to mitigate it. And if there is a possibility that you can transfer it to somebody else, you transfer it. And that's the way you treat the threats. But positive risk also exists, which means, because that is happening, your opportunity to be better is going to increase. And in that particular case, the counter tactics work. If you avoid it, you want to exploit it. If you want to mitigate it, you want to enhance it. If you want to transfer it, you want to share it with somebody else. This is how it works. And as long as that is within the project threshold, you accept it. If it is above your project threshold, you escalate it to your management. So this is how things go up and down. So what are some of the firms' use of risk to promote agility in different things? Again, deep dive on risks to requirements and test cases much early. And DEEP itself is an acronym over here. It means detailed appropriately, emergent, estimable, and prioritized. And so risk-adjusted product backlog refinement comes into play here. The next one is think about investing in risk-based prioritization in planning, development, and testing. Right now, INVEST also is an acronym. Those of you that are familiar with agile approaches will know this. INVEST stands for independent, negotiable, valuable, estimable, small, and testable. Right. The next one is going to be continuously aid in monitoring your risk life cycle completely. And aid is something that I created here, which stands for aggregate risk, like the individual risks that are actually contributing to a higher risk, like at the program risks, the individual risk, which are at the project level, and the dependent risks. One risk is causing another risk to potentially happen, like the primary and secondary risk that we talked about, right? So what are some of those things that we need to keep in mind? not last but not the least, promote Rome across the teams. Now, Rome is also another acronym. It's called resolved, owned, accepted, and mitigated. This is the one that the scaled agile framework, SAFe promotes. But here I'm basically coming back to the concept of who owns it. It's an acronym, but at the end of the day, it is resolved, addressed, which means I don't need to worry about it. It's owned. Somebody needs to own it. The risk owner should actually, go forward with the analysis or evaluation, the mitigation plans or risk response plans and everything else. And ultimately, somebody is accepting that, as I mentioned in the risk response strategies, or we have put together a mitigation plan. And if it falls below that, we have to accept it. Risk burn down chart. We can also create what is called a risk burn down chart to see how we are doing in our risks. So we can basically take a look at our risk exposure, cumulative risk exposure for all the risks that we have in an iteration, and start monitoring this to see how well we are doing in terms of reducing the risks. The more we are able to do that, the better we are, right? So Inspira Plan, which is the Inflectra product for application lifecycle management at portfolio program and project level for multiple teams to work together. Risk module was added a long time back in its early 6.0 versions. This helps track individual risks, understand them, assess them, and connect them with multiple artifacts and see how those things are working, report on them, create graphs, and all those things exist. And we can also connect with tasks to see how we are using them to control the work and stuff like that. And later we included the support for failure mode effect analysis on a need-only basis. People can enable what is called Aspira apps functionality to support failure mode effect analysis. And risk is coming to the Spira team, which means, we have 3 different editions: Spira Test, Spira Team, and Spira Plan. We are actually trying to bring Spira risk to the Spira Team module so that, more teams can benefit from the risk module that we have, because we are seeing that risk is more prevalent, which is consistent with all the industry findings that I mentioned at the very beginning. Now, where is the industry going? Now, if I were to quickly review, another thing, where I bring up the DA browser here and show DA browser. We have, okay, 1 more minute. So if you look here, this is the discipline agile browser. And if you look, there are processes that are identified, and there are other processes and steps that are identified within each and every one of them. If I go inside the address risk, which is an ongoing, not at one time, constant basis, addressing the risk starts with what is your risk strategy, how you identify them, how you categorize them, how you compound them if there are multiple risks that are having aggregate effect, how to classify and score the risks, and how do you respond to a threat versus an opportunity, how do you consistently document the risk, and what are some of the tracing of risks that you are doing, and how you monitor them. So pretty much all these things, Spira Plan is trying to address them right here. So if I go inside my library of information system in Spira Plan here, you can see over here, risk is a separate artifact. In addition to requirements, documents, releases, test cases, test sets, source code, many other things, issues. We have tasks, so risk is a separate module over here. If I go inside my risk management module here, I'm able to see the risk canvas, where you are able to document individual risks and see the probability, the impact, the exposure, and all those things that I talked about. Now, all these things can be actually customized over here in this particular section, where you are able to come and say, what are my probability here? What are my definitions of probability? Similarly, what are my definitions of impact? I can also add some custom properties if I need to track something over there. And I can customize my workflow as well here in terms of how the risk is going to be identified. So I have identified it. I'm analyzing this. Once I analyze, I evaluate. Once I evaluate, I accept or treat the risk. So I have a process that I'm able to identify here. And I can also go and add a Spira app functionality, where I'm able to enable the FMEA app over here. I'm not going into the details here, but if I'm able to go inside that and enable that, I am able to come here and say, if I come to this particular module and say I would like to change the detectability to very high, or the catastrophic to something else, it changes my RTN number, which is what is the expectation there. So you can do a lot of things with respect to Spira, with how the risk management module is actually completely addressed. So that's where the industry is going, and Spira is pretty much aligned with where the industry is going, and we are leading there. So with that, I would like to bring it to a closure. Risk is all about a perception of reality. Please understand the triggers to appetite, threshold, tolerance, understand the entire risk management life cycle, so that you are able to capture the profile correctly in the communication plan, bring up the risk breakdown structure, document it to make sure that it is relevant to your project, program, and organization within the enterprise context, and incorporate that thought process in your agile planning right from the get-go, and continuously invest in learning. The more you learn, the better your risk management process will be. With that, I'll kind of turn it back to Rick.
Wow, Sri, that was a lot of information. Very, very thorough. I loved your summary slide there. I thought it was great. Things so thoroughly that people are left without questions. Certainly try to connect with myself and Sri on LinkedIn. If you have any questions after the fact, we're always around. And as you can see, Sri's got his contact information here as well. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Look forward to seeing you on a future webinar, and keep your eye out for future webinars. We've got a bunch coming up here in the next couple months. Lots of great topics, lots of great content. So again, Sri, thank you so much. Great webinar. And I hope everyone here has a great rest of the day and week.
Thank you. Thanks, Rick. Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.
Thanks, everyone.